Good evening, dear viewers, and a very warm welcome to our series Visit today. Thank you for your letters, thank you for your advice, for your often really loving feedback, and of course also for what weighs you down. Thank you for allowing me to create this show and of course to share something with you that makes you more mindful of things and more aware, and that is a nice task that I can do in this form. I have a letter from Heiko today. Heiko is 55 years old and maybe, Heiko, may I briefly summarize what you have written to me? It may be easier for everyone else to understand what is bothering you. You write that you would like a second opinion of me, and I want to help you with that. You write that Parkinson's disease was diagnosed in 2018, which you can easily understand, because life has thrown you off course. However, it is becoming increasingly clear to you that in the current care of medicine you feel a bit lost and you have the impression that you should look for other ways. You write very sincerely that you are a father of 3 children, did high-performance sports from 1978 to 1987. I think anyone who is a high-performance athlete knows what it takes for a body, but also every doctor knows that. You had a physical education degree and so on. Under the circumstances, life changes, taking care of your mentally handicapped sister, with the daily journey to and from your work with a total time of 4 hours, then built a house, next to 3 children, and then an emotionally tragic death of your mother, I believe, is compensation for a situation which of course has derailed on many levels. Personally, I don't like it when people say I have Parkinson's, because this kind of Parkinson's prompts us to do things as we do with everyone who has Parkinson's. I understand your concern because you already had 10 years ago, so I think far prior to this onset or progression to this condition, a smell disorder. And this smell disorder. Then of course nothing really got any further in the course of the clarification, and years later there is a so-called Parkinson's disease. These so-called olfactory nerve pathways that run from the nose to the brain have a direct connection to the brain cells. That is, in the processing of memory, in the processing of our emotions, of course, through this direct connection of these olfactory nerves to the brain, with olfactory disturbances, all the alarm bells must ring. That means, of course, you can't just clarify this neurologically, but you have to look at it as part of a holistic diagnosis. What then led to these smell disturbances in the body? So these are typical, shall I say, harbingers of the development of neurodegeneration. At the time, however, that did not help you further from the point of view of a neurological examination, and yet this Parkinson's disease later became a reality. I just want to point this out again, and also point out to viewers that if you have a smell disorder that is perhaps not temporarily caused by a virus, but lasting over a longer period of time, please don't give up now, to examine the whole body in this regard, so to initiate a holistic diagnosis now. You have already had some experiences, you started to embark on a different path. You wrote me that too, but I just want to explain to you that of course when there is a load, that we humans experience when we go through an oversized stressful situation, that our body uses its so-called neuroendocrine stress axis, so via the adrenal glands, providing adrenaline, cortisone, norepinephrine, via the pituitary gland, the thyroid, and of course serves an incredible stressful situation to our body. However, not everyone can withstand these loads in the same way, but of course it requires an incredible cortisol output. Dihydroandrosterone is the pre-hormone from testosterone and estrogen, that's what it's made of. The other would be cortisol. And if cortisol is now increased, mobilized, and that is not new in this life situation, as a competitive athlete, you also have these stress phenomena to a large extent and can also call it up constantly, then of course that means that the heart rate rises, that the blood pressure rises, and that the body actually mobilizes so much energy reserves that it can withstand this life. That means what you have to do in terms of tasks, and you have a 2-hour commute each morning and you have to go back in the evening. And you have in mind building a house, and you have in mind taking care of a family. That is of course different for all of us. How far do these stress stimuli affect our hormonal system? And those excess stress stimuli, and by that I mean excess in the form of longevity, we're talking here not about 2 months, we are certainly talking about a larger and longer period. Even if you write that you accompanied your mom over 15 years and cared for a tumor disease, then I must tell you that of course within our strength and within the framework of our regulatory power to deal with a stress response, we have different requirements. But what defines us as human beings is that we can all withstand a stressful problem differently. And an adrenal overload with the cortisol exhaustion will always follow at the end. This means that all overstimulation of energy reserves, that stress hormones are sometimes exhausted. And when the adrenals go into adrenal exhaustion, which medically you don't actually notice, even though there is Addison's disease, which is a real adrenal insufficiency, but gradually got into this exhaustion, and in the end maybe you don't immediately feel the exhaustion on the outside because I have to perform, but the exhaustion on the inside means that the adrenal gland in its triad is now developing a so-called stress intolerance, can no longer weigh up a chronic inflammation, and of course the psyche very often suffers from not being able to live life itself anymore with the same power as before. And Parkinson's is a problem that has a lot to do with dopamine metabolism. And dopamine as a precursor of serotonin is also formed in the intestine. For this reason I regard Parkinson's as a disease of the intestines. And it is the most important thing to take care of because all transmitter systems via the vagus to the brain essentially come from the intestines in the first instance. And that's important when this overproduction of dopamine, this delivery of enough neurotransmitters made you a strong man. This is necessary for the athlete alone, endurance stress, the training load. But then with advanced age, it characterizes this person, who was able to withstand this strain for many years with the greatest commitment, then it was an oversupply of dopamine. And this dopamine, of course, has to start as a neurotransmitter and has to be broken down. Neurotransmitters are set up and broken down. And so it needs an enzyme that breaks it down. And you wrote in your email that you recently stumbled upon it through a broadcast with the variant of the COMT. This is the so-called polymorphism in the genes that we have genetically fixed, but must not directly come to fruition in our lives. But when that gene is turned on, and now, of course, we're on to the stories that make up my life, with my stress, then the body can no longer take care of it, that they remain switched off. Then, with a so-called heterozygous or homozygous, for example, genetic variant, this enzyme has a 50% or 100% inactivity. But now it only becomes dangerous when this dopamine is there, but is insufficiently broken down. Then there is an oversupply of dopamine, and that of course brings the whole thing into an incredibly powerful situation. Until the body reacts to it in the long term and the substance nigra in its own dopamine production goes down for me. This means that you speak about neurotransmitters, metabolic pathways. You have to talk about the issue of endotoxins in the intestine, so-called lipopolysaccharides. If the gut has high mucosal immunity, then the entire immune system is now being burdened by it. You have to understand neuroinflammation, which comes into play via a disturbed intestine. These are all things that as part of this neurotransmitter system are no longer based in equilibrium, and of course they provide a clinical picture characterized by the rigidity, characterized by the tremor that Parkinson described, 150 years ago. But that doesn't mean that this state, if understood, also needs a way. And you wrote to me that you have already done some things. You have worked with the vitamin D dose. You have already had detox infusions, and you have already performed an iron usphoresis twice. Thank you very much for sending me laboratory values as well. And of course with a very high burdensome toxicity of heavy metals, and mercury in particular are neurotoxins, of course, a good detoxification capacity is also important. And this pleomorphism, the COMT, is of course partly responsible for that toxins are no longer optimally broken down via the liver. That doesn't just have something to do with the fact that it's just heavy metals. It's also about solvents, it's about pesticides, it's about organophosphates and other toxic burdens. And for my terms, with the concentration based on what balance to restore, which pushes better COMT activity, one is able to allow the whole system to slowly return to its own ability to regulate. Every person with such a disease is different. Different things play a role for each individual. I don't think we know a lot yet, but we already know a lot. And if we don't address these things and include them in our range of treatments, then I don't think that we move forward. If we continue to live this high-stress cascade now, then we will keep going against the wall. That means we have to bring the body in a situation where it gets into a great inner peace. Well, one thing is what I say, the other is of course the circumstances. How can that be implemented in life, maybe even ongoing stress? I hope and wish the house is now finished. I hope and wish that the children are independent. But these are things that are really, really important right now, that this whole neuroendocrine stress axis can recover. And what is provided in stress from the body within seconds, for minutes or for a short time, that this will still be the case tomorrow, but that on the other hand via the high vagus, via the parasympathetic, via the power to regenerate, that one tries to get back into a vegetative balance. That is the basic requirement. So as soon as a person in your case comes into an inner restlessness, the tremor is also stronger. And for example, what did I want to say now? Naltrexone. Naltrexone, which is needed, for example, to treat morphine addiction, has a great approach in this treatment as well. Naltrexone is taken in the evening, 1.5 milligrams. Of course, you have to discuss it with a doctor. But naltrexone, and that is reflected in research papers, brings out endorphins by 300%. These are happy hormones. And this brings the body under this inner state of tension into a great calm. It's a very, very low dose. This can be adjusted every 4 weeks. You have to discuss this with someone who also has experience with naltrexone. But they are all bridge builders. All bridge builders for a body that tends to get out of this derailment in the long term. And get ready for a long and big process. You are 55 years old. You are not 78 or 80. You have a time ahead of you when you have to be patient. I know that won't be easy for you, but with patience you can relieve this mountain of stress. And of course I have to say the high toxic loads do not bother everyone. But the one who still faces them with stress and needs to sidetrack their whole detox, because they serve life, of course they have to take care of it now. And ionospheresis of course is an incredibly great way of general detoxification. The direct, but productive extraction of heavy metals, that's just one point. Heavy metals are then decoupled and are released through the filter and really filtered out. But that's not it at all. With apheresis, for example, which filters out a lot of fat, you can also remove environmental toxins that are fat-soluble, filter it out well. Also toxins bound to proteins can be filtered out via the ionospheresis. And so many toxins are mobilized which you may not find directly in the eluate now, but now via the normal detox they are filtered out. And of course there is also the key: how is my liver detoxification? Is the liver still able to detoxify well? Is the liver ready? You gave me the results there too. As far as I'm concerned, you're already in the question of what can I do? You have taken your first steps. I wish you from the bottom of my heart that you accompany this process with a lot of confidence. It is a clinical picture and we always want to name everything. But whatever we call it, we're doing the same thing for everyone anyway. So let's not name it at all, but see it here as the high consequence of being overwhelmed with a chronic, serious toxic load and an urgent suspected instability of a bowel function in combination with a genetically active disorder in polymorphism, COMT. A huge diagnosis, but it gives us something to touch, something to do. And dear Mr. Poggle, who wrote the book, Healing Without Chemicals, Parkinson's, comes to me twice every year. It took Mr. Poggle 7 years. But that is his path and it must have been very different from yours. It's many, many Poggles, picking up more and more, falling down 1,000 times, but are getting up again. But please believe me, your body has been trying to prevent it for you for well over 7 years. And at some point it's enough for it and it can no longer balance these high-quality metabolic, immune and neurotransmitter function and no longer guarantee them for you, and it would like that. So help it, take good care of yourself, don't put yourself under pressure and just let it happen in the good knowledge how to stick with it month after month and step by step and to do something. And with this in mind, I wish you, Heiko, and I wish all people who are also affected by a similar situation, we see a real dramatic increase in neurodegenerative diseases. We have to find it in each individual's life. And that's where we doctors have to help and start, and under no circumstances will we stop with a clinical picture, but we will try to free the body from this burden again. Then it is also able and latest Mr. Poggle has convinced us that even these things can be regenerated. I'm not just saying that superficially, I'm saying it out of deep consciousness. In this sense, healing needs truth. One must face these questions of life, and it is not just the question that people say that their tremor has to be cured. The diet has to be right. I have to take good care of the body. Healing has to happen on many levels, and I therefore wish you and your dear family a lot of strength and, above all, a lot of patience. I look forward to the next episode of Visite with all of you, and above all, whenever you send me your questions or would like to share concerns, also like to give 1 or 2 critical hints, but also have any comments or questions that I can answer, please write to Visite at QS24.tv, and then I would like to consider it in the next episodes and answer them for you as best I can. With this in mind, I wish you all a wonderful spring week and look forward to the next show. Goodbye.